Easy now, almost there. You're doing great. Easy now, almost there. You're doing great.
Man saves a drowning bear, but when it reaches shore, the bear does something horrifying. The powerful strokes that should have carried the brown bear easily across the Chilkat River were growing weaker with each passing minute, his massive head barely staying above the churning brown water that had transformed from a familiar crossing point into a death trap. Forest Ranger Jake Morrison spotted the struggling animal from the raised platform of his observation tower, the bear's dark form barely visible against the debris-filled current that had swollen to 3 times its normal size following the unprecedented spring thaw that had claimed so much wildlife across the Alaskan wilderness. Jake grabbed his binoculars and focused on the scene unfolding below, his heart sinking as he recognized the signs of an animal in genuine distress rather than simply navigating challenging conditions. The bear's swimming pattern was erratic and increasingly desperate, his powerful shoulders working against currents that seemed determined to sweep him toward the treacherous rapids that marked the river's most dangerous section. Each stroke appeared to cost more energy than it gained in forward progress, and Jake could see the telltale signs of hypothermia beginning to affect the animal's coordination as the glacier-fed water leached warmth from his massive frame. This was no ordinary river crossing gone wrong. Jake had observed hundreds of bears successfully navigate these waters during his 8 years stationed in this remote corner of Tongass National Forest, had documented their seasonal patterns and learned to read the subtle signs that separated routine wildlife behavior from genuine emergency situations. This bear's movements spoke of exhaustion that went beyond normal exertion, suggesting he had been fighting the current for much longer than any healthy animal should have needed to reach the opposite shore. The spring flood had created conditions that challenged even the most experienced river crossers, turning familiar landmarks into hazardous obstacles and transforming predictable currents into chaotic torrents that defied navigation. Uprooted trees swept past like battering rams, and the water level had risen high enough to eliminate the shallow crossing points that bears typically used during their seasonal migrations. Yet something about this particular animal's struggle suggested complications beyond environmental challenges. Jake watched through his binoculars as the bear made another attempt to angle toward the shore, his powerful limbs churning against water that seemed to actively resist his efforts. The animal's breathing was visible even from this distance, steam rising from his muzzle in quick puffs that spoke of an overworked cardiovascular system fighting against cold that was sapping his strength with every passing moment. His dark eyes, when Jake could glimpse them between waves, held the wild panic of a creature who understood that his situation was becoming critical. The ranger's radio crackled with routine communications from other stations throughout the forest, but Jake found himself unable to respond to the normal flow of administrative updates as he watched this life-and-death struggle playing out in the waters below. The bear's head disappeared beneath the surface for several terrifying seconds before he managed to fight his way back up, water streaming from his coat as he gasped for air that seemed to provide little relief from his mounting exhaustion. "Come on, big fellow," Jake whispered, his voice carrying across the observation platform as he calculated the distance to his emergency equipment and the time it would take to reach the riverbank. The afternoon light slanted through the towering spruces as the bear continued his failing battle against forces that seemed determined to claim another victim from Alaska's unforgiving wilderness. Jake's descent from the observation tower happened with a kind of focused urgency that came from years of emergency response training, his boots finding each rung of the ladder while his mind calculated the equipment he would need and the approach that offered the best chance of reaching the drowning bear before the current swept him into the rapids. The emergency gear locker at the base of the tower contained mountaineering rope, a personal flotation device, and the collapsible rescue boat that had been installed specifically for situations like this, though Jake had never imagined using it to save a 700-pound predator from Alaska's most unforgiving waterway. The inflatable boat took precious minutes to deploy, minutes during which Jake kept glancing toward the river where the bear's struggle was becoming increasingly desperate. By the time he had the craft in the water and the rope secured to a sturdy spruce on the shoreline, the bear had been swept nearly 200 meters downstream from his original position. Jake's approach required threading the needle between helping the animal and avoiding the territorial aggression that even a drowning bear might display toward a perceived threat invading his space during a moment of vulnerability. The current grabbed Jake's boat immediately, requiring constant correction with the paddle to maintain any semblance of controlled movement toward the struggling animal. The river had become a living thing, actively working against his rescue attempt with eddies and crosscurrents that threatened to sweep both rescuer and victim toward the same deadly conclusion. Jake could feel the cold water seeping through his dry suit as spray from the churning surface found every gap in his protective gear, reminding him that hypothermia was stalking both of them in these life-stealing waters. As Jake drew closer to the bear, the full scope of the animal's distress became heartbreakingly apparent. The great creature's swimming had deteriorated into something that barely qualified as coordinated movement, his massive paws churning frantically but producing little forward progress against the relentless downstream pull. His breathing had become labored to the point where each inhalation seemed to require conscious effort, and his dark eyes held the glazed look of an animal whose body was beginning to shut down in response to prolonged exposure and exhaustion. The actual rescue required Jake to approach from downstream, using the current to his advantage while positioning the boat so that the bear might use it as a life raft rather than trying to physically haul such massive weight aboard. The most dangerous moment came when the exhausted animal made contact with the inflatable craft, his claws scraping against the reinforced material as he attempted to gain purchase on something solid. Jake found himself face to face with one of North America's apex predators, separated by less than 3 feet of space while both of them fought for survival in water that cared nothing for species or intentions. The bear's response to the rescue boat was one of desperate gratitude rather than aggression, his survival instincts overriding any natural wariness of human contact as he draped his upper body across the inflatable gunwale. Jake began the slow process of paddling and pulling both boat and bear toward the safety of the riverbank, each stroke requiring maximum effort against currents that seemed determined to drag them both toward destruction. The bear's weight made steering nearly impossible, transforming what should have been a routine paddle into a battle of endurance against forces that had already claimed too many lives in these waters. "Almost there, big guy," Jake whispered through gritted teeth as the shoreline grew slowly closer, though something about the bear's stillness was beginning to concern him. The moment the bear's front paws touched solid ground, Jake expected to witness the magnificent creature haul itself onto the riverbank with the powerful grace that defined his species. Instead, the great animal's rear quarters remained motionless in the shallow water, his massive frame supported only by front legs that trembled with exhaustion as he attempted to drag himself forward. Jake's heart sank as the terrible truth revealed itself in the bear's awkward positioning and the complete absence of movement in his hindquarters, understanding now why this apex predator had been so helpless against currents he should have easily conquered. The bear's front claws dug deep furrows in the muddy bank as he pulled his weight forward using only his forelegs, his powerful shoulders working desperately to compensate for hind legs that lay limp and unresponsive in the water behind him. Jake could see the confusion and distress in the animal's dark eyes as he struggled with a reality that defied every instinct his body had evolved to trust. This was not the temporary weakness of hypothermia or exhaustion, but something permanent and devastating that had transformed one of nature's most capable swimmers into a creature dependent on human intervention for survival. The spinal injury was likely recent, possibly sustained during a fall or territorial encounter that had left the bear's nervous system severed somewhere along his vertebral column. Jake had encountered paralyzed wildlife before, understood the cruel mathematics that govern survival in environments where mobility meant the difference between life and death. The bear's magnificent upper body remained strong and alert, but without the use of his hind legs, he would be unable to hunt, unable to escape danger, unable to perform the basic functions that wild creatures required to maintain their independence. Jake knelt beside the exhausted animal, maintaining respectful distance while observing the extent of the paralysis that had condemned this powerful predator to a fate arguably worse than drowning. The bear's breathing had stabilized now that he was out of the water, but his attempts to right himself only emphasized the futility of his situation. His great head turned toward Jake with an expression that seemed to carry both gratitude for the rescue and a profound bewilderment at the forces that had stolen his ability to be truly wild. The radio at Jake's belt crackled with routine communications from the Forest Service network, but he found himself unable to respond to queries about his status or location. The decision that lay ahead required consultation with wildlife veterinarians and conversations about quality of life that no one wanted to have, discussions about whether survival without dignity constituted mercy or cruelty in the harsh calculus of the natural world. "I'm sorry, old friend," Jake whispered as the afternoon light painted the river gold around them. The sound of distant geese calling overhead marked the passage of time that had run out for one of Alaska's great survivors.